To sketch a graph of a quadratic, you will always need to label your vertex and at least one other point. So if we think about our diagram of everything that we can do, we need the vertex. How can you get to the vertex? You can either get to it through your standard form, and that looks like it's the shortest, but getting standard form sometimes takes some time. Or you can get through factored form, x-intercepts, axes of symmetry to vertex, which seems maybe a little bit long. But what we're going to do on this question, first of all, the one other point is usually easiest to use your y-intercept. So that you can plug in 0 for x, and you get a y-intercept of 0, negative 14. So this is A. Then I am going to be unsure which path I want to take. I don't know if I want to go via the standard form method, which I think I wrote it first because it's the most typical. It's like, it tells you your vertex, why not use that? Or if I want to go through the factored form. And we'll talk about positives and negatives of both of them. And sometimes we'll look at it one and say, it's too negative for me, I just want to go through the standard form or through the factored form. So if I was doing standard form, the first step in changing to standard form is factoring out that negative 2 out of the first two terms and leaving my spaces. Okay? And if I was doing my factored form, I would factor negative 2 out of the whole thing. Like that. Can we factor? Can you factor x squared minus 5x plus 7? No. So we right away would be like, we're stopping here on this one. This isn't very helpful. So we're going to have to go via the standard form because the equation that we got wasn't factored. Why might we, if it was factorable, someone would say, well, why wouldn't you just always go the standard form? Do you see our standard form is going to have fractions? Yeah. So sometimes your standard form, you're like, it's going to have fractions, and I can factor. Maybe I'll do my factored form. Because when I go to this next step here, I know that it's going to be x minus 5 over 2 squared. And if it's 5 over 2 squared there, this has to be 25 over 4 that I add. Well, what have I actually done? I've actually subtracted 50 over 4, which is 25 over 2. So the opposite of subtracting 25 over 2 is adding 25 over 2. And then I would need a common denominator between negative 14 over 1 and 25 over 2 in order to add those fractions. Can you see that negative 14 is negative 28 over 2? So adding these together will be a negative 3 over 2. And I now know my vertex is at 5 over 2, comma, negative 3 over 2. So I go to sketch my graph now. I know that my y-intercept is at 0, negative 14. I'm going to just, without drawing a bunch of lines, I'm going to just estimate where I think negative 14 is going to be. My vertex is at 2.5, so maybe here. 2.5, negative 3 over 2. And I've sketched the graph. I have my vertex labeled and one other point. So for the second one, same thing. You plug in 0 for x, super easy to find your y-intercept. Okay? I don't know if I'm going to use standard form or factored form. If I use standard form, I would factor out as 4, x squared plus 3x plus 5, space, space. And for the factored form this time, I'm maybe going to just try to find my x-intercepts. I'm going to plug in 0 for y. Plug in 0 for y, and see if I can find my x-intercepts to write it in factored form. Standard form going to have fractions? Yes. Is factored form necessarily easy? Not necessarily. Okay? If you can factor that, you can write factored form. But that is not an easy one to factor. So I think in this case, probably most of you would still choose standard form. Okay? If you're wondering, can someone check? Does this work? Yeah. Perfect. It does work. So we can find x-intercepts, but again, they're not necessarily that nice either. So technically, the factored form would be y equals 4 x plus 5 over 2 and x plus 1/2. Even after I found those x-intercepts, I think for most of you it would still go, I still kind of like the standard form. This is getting pretty good. I'm pretty good at dividing that by 2. And then realizing that if this is 3 over 2, I would have to add 9 over 4. And if I've added 9 over 4 there, what have I actually done? I've actually added 9. So the opposite of adding 9 would be to subtract 9. And my vertex is at negative 3 over 2, comma, negative 4. So here I would still say I think I like the standard form better. So now when we go to sketch our graph, We can label our y-intercept, which happens to be at 0, 5. We can label our vertex at negative 1.5, comma negative 4. And if we wanted to, because we did factor it, we did figure out that we have an x-intercept at negative 1/2, comma 0. And negative 5/2, comma 0. So we have extra points labeled on this one. If a question says label your axis of symmetry, what they're asking you to do is to draw a dotted line through your vertex so that the parabola is symmetrical on both sides. All right, questions for practice? Circles 6 and 7.